Action.
All right. Welcome, everybody. Maybe we have a couple people trickling in, but we'll get started here. So this is session 4 of 4. So we're on the final session here, learning the basics of home growing, hobby growing, growing for your own medicine. Let me try to get this full screen here. Let's see if I can do that. There we go. All right. Cool. Yeah. So this is my Instagram here and my email. If you want to reach out, if you have any questions about the presentation or about your own grow, you can message me at HoneyBearGrows. So you can see the 3 sections that we've covered already. So if you're watching this on YouTube, you can go back and check those out on the Seed Clinic YouTube channel. So we're on session 4 here. So we're going to talk about, we're going to have 3 segments. So we're going to start with harvest and then drying and curing. And then we'll go through some common issues that you guys may run into as a new grower. And then we'll talk about, the world of sort of what I'm going to say are advanced topics. So things you don't need to know about if you're just doing a simple grow, but are really cool to kind of open your eyes to the universe of growing techniques that we have. So in the last webinar, I gave a schedule of and some things that you might want to purchase for your grow. So I'm not making any affiliate money or anything off of those, but if you're interested in just the list of things, I can email it to you, and those are also sectioned out over time. So for an example, maybe you don't need the full power light when you're just in early veg. You can wait a month if you want to plan your purchases that way. And then I also have a living cocoa recipe that I'm using and I've been quite happy with, and that's what this plant is in right now. And I can also send that to you. So there's a lot of benefits with cocoa that we talked about in the last webinar. Okay, so beyond this, this series of 4 sessions, I'm also going to be working on a YouTube channel in collaboration with MadMike420 on Instagram. So he's he's been growing for a lot longer than I have, and so he's a more experienced grower, so I'll kind of ask him questions. So we'll cover some of the basics, and then we'll cover some of the advanced tips, some of the things that I've never heard about before, and some of the things that you can learn about when you kind of know the plant really well. You can start to see these advanced tips and really maximize your yields and maximize your potency and your terpenes. So we'll dip our toe into some of the things that we'll start to talk about in those sessions. So the YouTube channel is not out yet, but you want to just watch HoneyBearGrows on Instagram and watch Mad Mike, and we'll put out a release for the YouTube channel when that's ready. Okay, so this is my current grow. We were just talking before we started recording. I'm going to be moving, so I downsized to 1 plant. So this is the 1 plant, and it was growing in veg that whole time that the autoflowers have grown, flowered, harvested, and been processed. So this plant is now on day 135. So you can see if you go for a big veg, if you veg for like 3 or 4 months or however long, you can get a bigger plant. And so that's how, this is what we were in before in this fabric pot, and now we're in this 14-gallon earth box. And the plant has gotten pretty big, and we'll talk about how we got there. Okay, so just to wrap up our discussion from last session about the flower phase. So one thing that I like to do is defoliation. Now you want to be careful about defoliation. You don't want to take too much biomass off of your plant, because the plant needs things like leaves to store sugars and to generate sugars through photosynthesis. But we do it carefully. So what we do is right before we flip to flower, we identify where we think our bud sites are going to be that are going to be good producers. We are going to strip away the branches on the lower half of the plant, or the lower third, give or take. So you can see in this image that there are a lot of kind of snip points here and a lot of little knots in the branches where I've removed some of the side branches. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is, as we're in flower and then we start to see where the bud sites start to form, we're going to remove leaves that would shade the bud sites. So the common wisdom is that bud sites, the buds need access to light to grow. So what we want to do is any large fan leaves that are shadowing the bud sites, we just want to snip those off. And if you do it early in flower, before you're at the 3-week mark, that's not going to be a problem. And so this is my plant when it was at its most defoliated. So we'll show you a before and after there. So the next thing I do is, as the buds are starting to form, I will pull away small bud sites that I know, as the plant stretches in flower, are not going to have any access towards the light. So if you're down in the bottom half of the plant, there's no way that this bud is going to produce. And so what we're doing is we're removing the little popcorn buds that are smaller, going to be smaller than, say, like a quarter. We're just going to pull those off because the plant basically has a set amount of resources that it can expend to either the buds up here that are nice and big and easy to deal with, or a bunch of little small buds at the bottom. So what we do is you'll find them forming like this, and you'll find little guys early on in flower that just barely look like, okay, you have a couple pistils there. It won't focus on it, but you know, we'll just pull those off with your fingers or with a clean snipper. Okay. So this is the plant. So after I transplanted and vegeted it for a couple additional weeks, it looked like what we see at the left, and then on the right, I pulled off a bunch of branches so that we have kind of a more focused and branchy structure that just focuses on these main stalks. Whereas on the left, there was just way too much going on. You couldn't get good airflow through the plant. That's another thing we want to encourage. And then you can see I defoliated even more here by removing some of the leaves. And you can see that I started training it with stakes to open the plant up. So what I have here are stakes, and then I'm pulling the branches apart from each other so that light can penetrate through all parts. And then you can see, you know, the plant behind me. So the plant has, I think, maybe like 2 or 3 weeks to go, and then I'll start kind of thinking about harvesting. Okay, so how do I know when to harvest? So you can start thinking about harvesting. Your plant is going to have sort of a listed schedule from the breeder. They'll say, you know, it takes like 2 months to flower, 8 weeks, whatever it is. And you can go by that as a very approximate number of when you want to start thinking about it. But what you're first going to start noticing in the plants as your buds mature is about half of your pistils are going to go from white to brown. So they'll eventually all turn brown, but when you're at the halfway mark, you're going to start taking a look with one of these small jeweler's loops. And this guy has a light on it here. So it's just like an extremely simple lens here that what we can do is we can hold this right up to our buds like you would look at like a diamond or whatever it is, and kind of check out the trichomes. So what you're doing when you're looking really close at the plant is you're going to see how your trichomes look. So we judge harvest by trichome maturity. So you have your buds that are looking good, and then we're going to really zoom in on those trichomes. And you can see here, they start out clear, and then they'll turn cloudy, and that's when we know we're at a good potency. Clear trichomes don't really have the potency that we want. And then amber trichomes are a step beyond that, and we'll talk about that in a minute. So what most people do is they will chop their plant when they are at the 85% cloudy, and then there's distributed throughout maybe 15% of the amber trichomes. And you're going to judge that by looking ideally at the middle point of your buds. So if you look at the top, you might see that things are more mature than in the middle, but the middle tends to be a good average. So you can look at a few buds in the middle of them. You don't want to look at your leaves. Just make sure you're not zoomed in on a sugar leaf, because that'll also be even more mature and you'll just get a false reading that way. Okay, so if you are using liquid nutrients, something to keep in mind is as you're coming close to the chop date, judging by your trichomes, you want to start to flush it with water. So that just means cut off any of your liquid nutrients in the last 2 weeks. And what that does is just sort of flushes out some of those nutrients out of the buds, and it gives you sort of a less harsh smoke with the final dried product. Okay, let's see. So some people will harvest their plant in stages. So I don't do this because it's a little bit more work logistically, but what some folks will do is they'll take the tops of the plants and then they'll process those, and then they'll take the middle, and then they'll let the lowers mature a bit more and then take those last. You can do that if that's something, if you really want to maximize everything, but it's not as common because it's quite a bit more work. And we can see this image at the bottom here. When your plant is really getting towards the final stages of flower, you may see some fall colors here, as you know, just like our trees would, the leaves would kind of lose some of the photosynthetic compounds. Your cannabis is going to do the same thing. So just do not be frightened of that. So, all right, so here are some close-ups. So again, we have new trichomes on the left, and then maybe like a month into flower, they're going to turn cloudy, and that's when you're going to have your potency. And then beyond that, so that's going to be sort of a THC focused lane right here in the middle with the cloudy trichomes. And then, amber trichomes are a step beyond that. So amber trichomes are what the cloudy trichomes kind of break down into an amber state. So the common grower knowledge is that we're going from a THC focused lane to more of a CBN focused lane. I may be wrong about that, but in effect, what it's going to do is it's going to give you more of a head high with the cloudy trichomes and more of a sort of a body, maybe sedating kind of effect with the amber trichomes. So that's my preference personally. So I let the plants run a little bit longer. And so in that way, you guys can sort of tailor your plants to how you like them to be in effect. So it's really nice. It's a simple way for you to get what you want out of your medicine here. Now, you do want to be careful if you're starting to cross into like over 20% amber threshold. I'm going to advise you to be careful in that area, because as your plants, you know, they're not going to be around forever, right? They're seasonal plants. So as you're getting into the 20% mark, you know that your plant is getting towards its end of life stages. So if you're seeing really extreme, all your leaves are yellow, you want to just bear in mind that near the end of life, cannabis will make a final hormonal push to try to reproduce, and it will start producing male anthers. So just be on the lookout, because you don't want to have the male anthers pollinate all your buds and then you say, oh, I waited a week too long and now we have seeds. So that's going to hurt your potency. Just something to have in the back of your mind there. Okay, so this is a fun study I came across. So most of us are going to be dealing with what people call chemotype 1. So it's just more THC than CBD, kind of in a general sense. I think that's accurate, right? Okay, cool. So what we want to focus on for most of us here is just this red line here. What we're seeing is these guys plucked buds off throughout flower, and they just tested for THCA. So you can see we have a peak at maybe 165 days, but there is going to be a drop off in that THC. So there's a peak point. If you're looking for THC, there's a peak point, and you know, you can cross that, no big deal, but you kind of want to keep an eye out for that drop off there. Let's see. Sometimes you might find like larger grows might harvest a few weeks early, and they might kind of be short of that peak point, but you know, people have to make their money. So all right, okay, so you've decided today you're going to harvest. There have been a number of times when I've looked at my plant, I've had a busy day and I've just looked at it and I've said, you know, I'm going to harvest today, and it's happening, and it takes, you know, a few hours. It's a little bit of a scramble. I'm sure you've heard of like wine growers recruiting extra help to come pick the grapes on the perfect day of ripeness or whatever to get that really good grape quality. So we're doing kind of the same thing. Okay, so after we've dried, we're gonna talk about let me talk about how to chop your plant actually first. So I like what we see at Right is a really good example of how you want to be chopping down your plant. Some people do hang their whole plant. Um, that is not something I'm going to recommend for newbies, but it's something, maybe try one day. So we like to chop our stalks such that we have a lot of buds on one branch, and not too much of the stem. So if you have a lot of excess stem, you'll clip that off. But you have a lot of buds on one branch. So, if you can see this, maybe I'll clip this guy here before it's all branched and it's just all bud. So, and then I'll just give myself about an inch to attach a clip to hang it with. Sometimes if I can, I'll look for the formation of kind of a V shape between two stalks, so I can just sort of throw it over the clothes hanger that way. It's a little easier. So I use one of these hangers here. It gives you a little bit better density. People use clothes hangers like this. Those are great too. I use a combination because I usually fill up one of these hangers. But so if you look at this diagram here, I would chop at these red points. So I'm chopping such that there's not like a ton of stem, but we're also being frugal with how many branches we have. So we're not having tons and tons and tons of clips that we need. That's how you're going to do that. So personally, I dry in my grow tent because it's already a temperature controlled area. So I get all my pots of soil out of there, and then I'll just hang some stuff to hang my buds with off the top of my tent, some clothes hangers and such. So what we're doing when we're drying is we want a really clean environment, and we want good air circulation, and we want controlled humidity, because what this step is going to do is protect us from mold on our buds. So you can think about if you just jammed a bunch of wet leaves into a jar, you'd have mold within like a couple days. So what we're doing is we're working out a way to circumvent that. So okay. So you can use like a closet or anything that, if you would grow there, you can dry there. So we want to be in the 45 to 55 range for humidity. You want to continue using your humidistats. I have a bunch of these that I put in my jars later. So I'll hang like a bunch of these from like a string to just kind of get an idea of what the humidity is throughout the tent and if I have enough airflow. So you're going to have an oscillating fan in there just to circulate air and to make sure that there aren't any pockets of humidity. That's the big risk that people may not understand, is humidity is not constant throughout your space. Your buds are going to have a pocket of humid, warm air around them, and you need to bust that up by hitting it with the oscillating fan. You don't want your oscillating fan to point directly at your buds because that'll over dry them. But if you just kind of have it pointed at the wall, it'll keep the air circulating and it'll keep it random enough that we eliminate those pockets. Okay, so we want it between 60 and 70 degrees Fahrenheit. That's not as important, but basically room temperature, not too hot, or you'll cook off some of your terpenes. Another thing that we're going to do before we hang them is we're going to take off any of our fan leaves. And any leaves, basically, if there's no leaves, trichomes on the leaves, they should be off. If they have like a stem to the leaf, pluck them off before you hang them. And what that's going to do is it's going to make it so that we're just drying our buds. The leaves will impart kind of a hay-like taste. So we don't want them. And they're also going to hold moisture, and we're trying to get rid of moisture. So we don't want that. Okay, so your dry time is going to take a range of 7 to 12 days. So we can adjust the dry time by adjusting where we are in that humidity range. So if we're at more at the 45% mark, we're going to have more closer to a 7-day dry. It depends on your conditions, right? So if you have a faster dry with lower humidity, you're going to be at less risk of mold, but you're going to be at greater risk of losing terpenes. So we have a balance where lower humidity is less mold and less terpenes, but higher humidity is more potential for mold and more terpenes. So real experts will go for a long dry, but let's not think about that quite yet. So try to shoot for more like 50% or maybe a little bit lower than that for your humidity. And then you're going to end up with like a 7 to 10 day dry, hopefully. And we judge when our dry is done because we need the plants to know that they're dry. What we're going to do is we're going to find a stem that's about the same diameter as a pencil, and you should be able to snap it cleanly. And what that's going to show you is that that stalk that you've dried doesn't have so much liquid that it just bends, but when it snaps, it's going to show you that, okay, we're at about the right range there. It doesn't have to be perfect. It's really an approximate kind of art. So then what we'll do is we're going to do a dry trim. So after we've dried the plant, we're going to trim. So just pick up one of these nice snippers. They are spring loaded, a lot of them, extremely sharp. And you'll sort of just take a bud, and this guy, top left, is just going to the base of that tiny little sugar leaf and snipping it off. And you're going to want to continuously dip this or rub it with an alcohol cotton ball so that you don't get all gummed up with those sticky buds. So you want to take off basically as much of the leaf as you can without hitting the buds at all. So it's better to leave leaf and not affect the buds than vice versa. You don't want to be hitting these things with like a weed whacker. So let's see. Also your buds, when you have them on those long stalks, any kind of free hanging buds, you're going to take off, and those are going to be what goes in your jar. And then your big colas, you can either save them or break them down. You know, some people like to have a trophy to wave around, but you know, you can break them down too if they won't fit in your jars. You know, a lot of them don't. Okay, so you know what we're doing with reducing the leaf content is the sugar leaves. Like I said, these leaves can have kind of a hay flavor to them, so it's going to detract from your total potency concentration, or like THC percentage. And also the flavor, like I said. Also those stems, you know, that's what's poking holes in your joints, so you want to take those out. You know, it also makes it just look nicer. People, you know, some old school people left the leaves on so that, you know, the final product, people could remove the leaves before they throw it in the grinder. Now, you know, we like our bag appeal, so we like to see like just the buds, and you know, I'll you know, check out the trichomes and stuff. But anyway, that's the modern style. So let's see. So when you're going to have a big pile of trim, like I usually have like an ounce or two of trim. What you can do just for a simple extraction of the trim is you can either like toss it in some can of butter and cook that. I think Seed Clinic YouTube probably has some tutorials on that. Yeah, so you should definitely check that out. It's pretty simple, kind of as easy as baking cookies, I think. Or what you can do is you can just buy a silk screen. So I have a silk screen. Message me if you need help with what size silk screen, because you want a particular one to catch those trichome heads. But you just rake your trim across the silk screen, and you'll get this. The trichome heads will fall out as dust underneath. So just do it over a baking sheet, and then you'll get a bunch of keef underneath, which is our trichome heads. All right, so let's see. Yeah, we'll go over some of the other concentrates you can make. So yeah, both of these in the left and the center, I wouldn't really accept. The one on the right looks pretty good, in my opinion. Let's see. All right, so now you're ready to throw everything in the jars for your cure. So if you remember the timeline we showed back in webinar 1, we're going to cure for about 3 weeks to a month. So what you're going to do is throw them in a jar. So you want to shoot for like half-gallon size. Unfortunately, there's a jar shortage right now due to COVID, because everybody wants to can their tomatoes and not their pots. So, you know, whatever. You get what you can. I use an enormous jar just because I'm lazy. But so you want to fill your jars about 80%. So you want some airspace in there. And there's a process to the cure, right? This is really where the art of terpene preservation comes in. So what I'm going to recommend is just the foolproof way, which is throw an Integra Boost packet in there. What it does is it absorbs humidity above the 62% mark, or it releases humidity if you're below the 62% mark. Get the 62% version. Okay. So just throw one of those in your jar. You can put a hygrometer in if you're kind of curious what your humidity is. And then for the first couple, like week or so, or week or two, you want to burp your jars. So what you're going to do is just pop your jar open, let it air out for an hour, and then close it back up. You can also rotate your buds, so take the top ones and throw them to the bottom and vice versa. And what we're doing again is a little bit of air circulation goes to prevent mold. So you don't want to lose your harvest to mold. So let's definitely do that. All right, so now we're in section 2 about like common issues and common plant illnesses. Okay, so what we're going to start with that is actually a symptom, which is nutrient lockout. So this is like one of the worst case scenarios, and it's sort of you're on the road to, your plant should be in the hospital if you're experiencing nutrient lockout, basically. So what we're going to talk about is identifying nutrient lockout. So what it is, and how you're going to know it is you're going to know that your plant has, hey, I've got plenty of nutrition in the soil. I'm feeding it plenty of nutrition, but it's getting yellow and it's not growing and it's having all these issues and it's turning different colors and it's keeling over and it's looking sick. So that's why we call it lockout, because it's the opposite of uptake. It's lockout. Okay, so so your plant's not able to eat, basically. It can take on water, but it can't eat. So what we're going to talk about are the causes. So that's going to be overfeeding, nutrient buildup, overwatering, incorrect pH in the soil, or incorrect pH in your water if you're running hydro. So all kinds of things can cause it. Then as far as the diagnosis, it's a process of elimination. So you can verify that you're running your nutrients at reasonable levels and you're not overdoing it. You're going to verify that you're going to know that you've been pHing to 6.5, give or take, on every feed. You're going to test your soil slurry, know that that's around 6.5, give or take. If you want, you can even calibrate your pH meter just to make sure it hasn't gone off, which is a common issue. So that's how you're going to know. It's just process of elimination. So the fix, if it's overwatering, let your soil dry out. If you can, transplant it to soil that's going to be easier draining if possible. Okay. Now, for any of the other listed causes, the cure is going to be flushing your media. So you're going to take pH complementary water. So that means if your soil pH is low, you're going to flush it with high pH. So if your soil is 6, you're going to water it with 6.8 pH water so that your pH comes back into the 6.5 range where we want it. And when you're going to flush it, you're going to be putting like several gallons of water through your media. And that's in hopes to flush out the bad stuff and basically reset your plant. Okay, so the first cause that we talked about is going to be, okay, you missed pH, you forgot, I've forgotten, we all forget. If you do it once, it's not going to kill the plant, but your plant cannot eat because it can only uptake nutrients, as we talked about a couple webinars ago, if you're in the right range. So it has to do with the chemistry and the way that the plant uptakes nutrients with its ions. So yeah, like my tap water is 8.0, not the worst thing in the world, but just start doing it. Start pHing your water correctly. Now, long-term poor pH is going to lead to poor soil pH. So what you want to do is be taking the soil slurry every 2 weeks. So again, that's 1-to-1 ratio by volume. So a couple ounces of soil, a couple ounces of distilled water. Mix it up with your pH pen. Take a reading here. This guy's reading 4.9. His soil is way too acidic. So what he needs to do is probably flush with high pH, like a 6.8 pH water, to try to get it back where the plant can uptake nutrients. Okay, so the long-term consequence of that, like we talked about, is going to be nutrient lockout if it's been going on for a while. Okay, so another thing you can do is to fix an acidic soil is add dolomite lime, but that takes a while to break down, so that's a long-term fix. So just continue measuring your soil pH and keep trying to push it in the right direction, and eventually it'll get where you want. Okay. Next most common issue is going to be nutrient excess. Nutrient companies want to sell you a lot of nutrients. Some plants we've bred these race horses of cannabis plants that want a lot of nutrients, right? They want to go fast. They want high octane fuel. But maybe you have a plant that doesn't. So there's become some kind of variation in this plant likes a lot of calcium. I know it doesn't like much nitrogen. Here, if I fed it too much nitrogen, this is a picture of a nitrogen toxicity, and so every element that the plant needs is going to manifest as a different kind of appearance of health in the plant if there's an excess. So what I always tell people is, like, when you're starting out your plant and it's about like 6-inch tall seedling, start your nutrients at about a quarter strength. So that sounds really low, but your plant doesn't need that much nutrition to get started, especially if you're in soil. You might not need to give it anything. So start it up gradually, and then make sure that your plant is healthy throughout as you're increasing it over maybe like a month. So if you start to see issues like this nitrogen toxicity, then just back it off to where you were the previous week. So if you want, you can use an EC meter to measure the concentration of dissolved nutrients in your water, and you can just kind of check that against your manufacturer's instructions as well if you're kind of unsure, but they should give you a dosing schedule. So long term, this can also lead to nutrient lockout. Okay, so if you have a nutrient deficiency, so that's going to tend to happen more with your dry amendment folks. So what I'm running into now is a calcium deficiency, a slight calcium deficiency. And this is an extreme calcium deficiency here. So what you get for that is going to be its own unique set of symptoms. So it's going to be yellowing plant, curling new growth, similar clawing of the tips like we saw with that nitrogen toxic plant. This is going to show as clawing tips. It's not growing. Plant looks just overall bad. But that magenta stem is a giveaway. Okay, so like I'm running dry amendments. So what I should have done is I should have dry amended earlier so that the plant doesn't get hungry and then the grower freaks out and then has to put on a bunch of top dressing. So you want to just have a schedule to your plant, have an idea of when it's going to need a lot of nutrients, which is going to be as you jump into flower, as you're late in veg, and that's when you're going to want to re-amend with more of what you've been growing with, or like more of a bloom boost for flower. So you can see here what you want to look up is this chart. If you just look up cannabis nutrient deficiency and excesses, this chart has been published all over the internet. And if you were to zoom in, you can see that, a nitrogen excess, because it's responsible for green leaf health, your leaves look really green and great, but they're clawing and they're having other issues. So that's what your nitrogen deficient or excess is going to look like. But a deficiency is going to be yellowing and small leaves and poor vegetative growth. So we have a whole list of things here. You want to go by first N, P, and K, as well as calcium. Focus on those 4 first, and then start looking into magnesium and sulfur. And there's trace elements, but most of those are in like a kelp meal or a kelp liquid application. So you shouldn't have to sweat things like iron too much. You just feed it a little bit of kelp and you should be fine. Okay, so another common issue is going to be pests. So I'm going to explain to you guys, we have what we call integrated pest management. It's basically what is used in modern agriculture, modern landscaping. It's basically like a modern approach to pests. And to me, what it means is applying a combination of reasonable defenses and prevention against agricultural losses. So when we say ag losses, we mean, okay, like your grow up is going under. So we're not going to let the grow up go under. If a bug wants to, if my cat wants to nibble on these leaves here, he can do that as long as he doesn't take down my whole grow. And, it's fine. He eats, he takes bites out of the plant and my plant gets to grow, no problem. That's more of an outdoor thing. I personally don't have any pests, and I haven't for a while because I'm really extreme about prevention. So number 1 prevention is going to be healthy plants. Number 2, so avoiding those deficiencies that we talked about. Number 2, always be scouting your plant. Okay, I'm gonna come in here and I'm gonna look at this leaf looks a little bit chewed up. Okay, I can tell by the signs of this that my cat came through. I can look at the top leaves and say, okay, my cat didn't get that far up the plant, so it's not a big problem. Um, you know, some of these bugs are extremely small, so you want to give yourself a minute to really look. If you're seeing little spots, little yellowing, little pieces taken out of your plant, you're going to start suspecting insects. So scouting is important. And that's a lot of what you're doing with your plant is just kind of checking on its health, and that this is part of it. So the other thing we do is we practice hygiene, right? So we've learned about, like with COVID, we have like this quarantining protocol, right? So good plant hygiene means never bringing outside plants in if you can avoid it. If you have to, spray the entire plant with soap. This is what I do. Spray it with like a couple drops of soap and some water. Spray the plant. Act as if you know it has bugs, even though it might not. And then I put a layer of diatomaceous earth down, as a preventative. Okay. So always wash your hands after you've been out in your outdoor garden if you've been landscaping. If you go to like a big grow, take a shower before you go in your own grow. That's a big problem with commercial grows is they get infected by some people's home grows. Kind of unfortunate. Don't take in people's clones. Like personally, I trust my own clones and like we could talk about that, but like generally don't take in people's clones. And my grow space is sealed, right? So I keep it sealed and then I'm in, an apartment and then I have a couple layers of doors before we reach the outside. A bug cannot just wander in through that maze and find my cannabis plant. Okay, so let's say that you have pests or you want to practice some more preventative. So we'll talk about mechanical controls. So what that means is just interfering with the bug's like respiration or its ability to hold on to your plant. So what I like is going to be, again, that soap spray. And if you want like a Dr. Bronner's is what a lot of people like because it's kind of few ingredients. You can also use there's Mammoth Can Control is a popular product that launched recently. So that's both going to put a layer of essential oils on your plant, so it's harder for the bugs to chomp on them. And then it's also going to suffocate them. So it's similar mechanism to the soap. Other mechanical controls I practice. So I always sprinkle diatomaceous earth, a layer to kind of any insects that would burrow in are going to be stopped. So that's going to be really good for your fungus gnats. Everybody's had fungus gnats, and you can combat them with these sticky traps that we see here, as well as the diatomaceous earth. Also just, if you have fans blowing around, it's not going to be a fun time for the insects either. They do get tired. Okay, so I also deploy predator mites. So I brought in a basil plant, right? And maybe a couple years ago. And this basil plant had thrips on them. And I saw that it was starting to get to my cannabis plant. So I could see on the top a little bit of speckling. So what I did was I bought some predator mites. And let me see, maybe I can find an image for you guys later, but they're very small mites. They're about the size of a spider mite, if you've ever seen those red guys crawling around outside. So they look just like that, except they're kind of a beige color. And these guys, I really like Swirsky mites. They're generalists. They hunt mites, russet mites, thrips. And then what I look for in a predator mite is something that doesn't just eat the prey, but is an omnivore. So it also eats a little bit of mold that exists on the soil, so I can maintain a population. Because if you have, say, ladybugs, you'll throw them in your grow, they'll eat what they need to, and then they'll starve, and you can't keep them around. So it's one-time use. So we don't want that. So biological controls are expensive, but if you can maintain a herd of them like I do, it's a little more practical. So I can also gift some to you if anyone's interested in getting in touch. On the extreme end, you can use Dr. Zymes, which is like a citric acid-based product. You can use spinosad. It's OMRI listed, but like everything that's OMRI listed, you have to be careful. For example, spinosad, I believe, breaks down in the presence of UV light. I don't have UV light in my grow. So then where are we with this OMRI listing? Okay. So just kind of think about it before you go spraying, and never spray buds. We do not spray buds. It's really a bad idea. Okay. All right, so now we're on to the advanced tips section. So this is just to give you guys a feel for, whoa, there's all these techniques out here to kind of make my grow more efficient and yield bigger. So we'll talk about cloning here. That's going to be a way where if you guys have a particular strain that you want to hold on to after you've grown out your plant, you say, ah, geez, I wish I had that. So the solution is during veg, you're going to take a cutting of your plant, maybe some that you defoliated, like we talked about, and you're going to cut those with sterile snippers. They should be, maybe about yay big, 6 to 8 inches long. You'll remove all the extra leaf sets, so you'll take off those big fan leaves and just leave a couple sets on the top, and then you'll trim the tips so that you have kind of like a minimal size clone going with those leaves. And then you're going to take the bottom bit of the branch or the stem and you're going to scrape it with like a razor blade or scissors so that you have some exposed stem below the epidermis. And then you're going to take that and you'll dip it in some cloning gel. So you can buy that online or at a hydro store. It's also called a rooting hormone. So this hormone triggers your little cutting to produce roots. So then what you can do is you just take that dipped clone or dipped cutting, and you're gonna stick it in one of these peat cubes so that in the peat cubes you have soaked with distilled water. So you're gonna have water, air, and then you're eventually gonna get roots. So your plants are small, you don't want to overload them. So what you're gonna do is, first of all, while they don't have roots, you're gonna mist them with water, fine mist, every day or twice a day if you can. You're going to give them low, like ambient type of light. You can just set them out on your countertop for 18 hours so they stay in veg, or more than 12 hours of light a day. And then what you're going to do is also maintain the humidity for your clone. So what you want to do is I take like a plastic cup and I just stick it on top of my clone, and there you go. It's got humidity after I've misted it. So plants can take in a water through their leaves if they don't have roots. So you are giving this guy life support. So you need to be pretty diligent about it and expect maybe like a quarter to half of your clones not to make it. That's okay though. Okay, so maybe like after a couple of weeks, you'll start to see roots on your cube, and you should be good to go. So just make sure that cube stays moist, and hopefully you can get some extra plants out of that, and they'll grow to be full-size plants, which is great. Okay, so I'm going to talk to you guys here about something called super cropping. So let's get a little bit of perspective about our sources of knowledge here. So I'm just opening the door for you guys today, right? I'm not the expert in this. I've done super cropping, it's cool, but I didn't, invent it, right? So everything that I present to you guys, I try to make sure it has some basis in basic plant science. It's not rocket science here, guys. But there are a few exceptions, and those exceptions are when we talk about sort of traditional knowledge, hippie knowledge, things that people have been doing for a long time, right? So, gardeners have these little secret tips, right? And they get passed around. So cannabis is such a high value cash crop that taking the time to experiment on a few plants will reap a reward. So new standard operating procedures are always being developed in industry, in people's grows. I have the wrong text on this slide, but we'll just talk about super cropping though. So, hippies have been, growing cannabis for what, like 60 years, 100 years, who knows, in the underground, right? So we're kind of at the intersection of science and grower experience, right? So we'll take a look at super cropping as an example. So super cropping is a technique, I'm pretty sure it has not been studied thoroughly, as far as I know, on like a scientific basis. But it's been around for so long that we're pretty confident that it works. So enough for us to use on our home plants. So what super cropping does is it is a way of boosting plant growth, production, and potency. So what we're doing is imagine your cannabis plant out in the jungle or whatever, wherever it's growing. So what we're doing is we're simulating, like, say, an animal attack. It gets trampled by like a cannabis buffalo or whatever, and its stems get snapped. Now the plant says, I have two choices. I can die right here, or I can try to uptake as many nutrients as I can. I still have a healthy root base to work from. And I'm going to boost my growth as hard as I can to try to compete with all the other cannabis plants in our hypothetical scenario, right? So I'm not going to stay down here. I'm going to grow big and I'm going to really go for it and take that risk. So what we're doing is we're stressing the plant in a strategic fashion in the first week or two of flower. So we're not doing it when it's going to affect our bud health. But in the first couple of weeks of flower, what you do is you take one of these stalks and you're going to break down the cells in the stem. So you can imagine a straw. You're going to pinch it between your fingers. Every couple centimeters you're going to go, or maybe like every couple inches you're going to go and pinch it. And then that's going to make the plant a little bit floppy at that point where you've pinched it and broken those cells. And you'll feel it goes from being basically rigid to kind of flopping over. And then you're going to snap the plant. You're not going to break through it. So you're going to maintain that epidermis over that bend. And you're not going to have exposed flesh, but you're going to snap it. And this is the kind of stress that the plant, that really works with our plant. So what you're going to do is just bend that snap point down, and then you'll see a big boost in plant growth afterward. So that's something fun. Like, I think you guys should try taking a risk, maybe on like your second grow, and giving that a try. Okay. Oh, and you want to do it on like green pliable branches. You don't want these hard branches on the bottom. I wouldn't risk it because those will just break on you. Okay, so we'll talk about like simple concentrates. So just stuff you can do at home, nothing crazy, just really simple stuff. I got this image here when I looked up Rick Simpson oil. Rehabcenter.net can tell you about the dangers of Rick Simpson oil, which is like probably you'll get way too high. Okay, so okay, so we talked about sifting for keef, so just running it over. You can buy a screen, or I just use a silk screen. So you'll just run either your trim or your broken up small buds over this screen. And that's kind of the least aggressive way of trying to encourage those trichome stalks to fall off, or the trichome heads to fall off. And you can see I have a couple ounces here of keef that I just pulled together with those autoflowers. So that was not done with sifting, that was done with dry ice hash. So what you're gonna do for dry ice hash, if you're in the Boston area, there's a dry ice vendor in Cambridge who I will say is extraction friendly. What you do for that is I just threw a couple ounces of buds in here, and then about an equal amount by volume of dry ice. You throw it in this bag here. You can buy this for like 10, 15 bucks. And you can choose, I use like a 90 micron count screen. You can go finer or coarser, but just maybe try 90. And this has a screen on the bottom. And what we do is we just shake the bag with the dry ice, and the dry ice is so cold, it makes everything brittle and it makes those trichome heads fall off. So that's a cool way. That's how I generated this keef. You want to you're going to start getting more like sand color, and then eventually it'll turn a little bit green. So the sand color is a little bit of a higher grade with less plant material like this one has. So this will be like a more desirable, less kind of harsh experience for you. Okay, so we also have Rick Simpson oil, also called FECO, or full extract cannabis oil. And there's I'm not going to get into the semantics, but what you do for that is it's an alcohol extract. So you're just going to throw your trim or your buds or whatever, you're going to break it up, throw it in a bunch of Everclear, and you're going to soak that. You guys don't have a Rick Simpson oil tutorial, do you?
We have a recipe. Yeah, it's on the website.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, okay. I would definitely just recommend check out the recipe at Seed Clinic. That's going to be the most reliable. This is just an idea of what you guys can do. So it's just soaking the buds in alcohol. That's going to be your solvent. That's going to dissolve your cannabinoids. And then you strain out with like a tea towel the greens, and then you're left with alcohol that's kind of like brownish. And then you're going to, over a very low electric heat, just evaporate all that alcohol, and then you've got your cannabinoids left. And it looks like this kind of sludge here, or like crude oil. And it's going to be an edible form. So it's extremely potent. You can also do like coconut oil. Also check out Seed Clinic for that. That's also like a good use for trim. Okay, so on like our last webinar, I'm also going to talk to you guys a little bit about a perspective on sustainability. Okay, so yesterday was 420, tomorrow is Earth Day. Okay, this is recorded on 421. So here we are, like quite literally at a crossroads in agriculture, on the ability of our planet to sustain life. You know, for us to have a happy time on Earth or kind of a hellish time, you know, us and our kids or whatever. So, you know, my main point here is that I have never eaten an indoor grown tomato. I've never eaten, okay, you know, there's a couple of hydroponic strawberries, right? And I grow a little bit of basil inside, but we're not eating corn or rice or potatoes that were grown inside. So let's realize that like the economics of cannabis are such that, you know, cannabis is a luxury and it's such an expensive cash crop that we can grow it inside. And that doesn't mean we should grow it inside. It means that people do grow it, they can afford to grow it inside. That said, none of us, well, okay, I shouldn't say, I personally would not die if I didn't have cannabis. You know, if that may not be the case for all of you watching, right? So just shape my words to your own situation. But point is, growing inside is a luxury. Okay, so like personally, I'm in an apartment. I would grow outside if I could, right? You can grow outside in a greenhouse, a protected environment. You can grow just in a pot out on your deck. You know, I could grow out on my balcony if I were allowed to. But, you know, the point is, like, it is somewhat wasteful of energy and resources and space to be growing cannabis inside in a city. You know, you could be growing it out in the farm. And as we see legalization occur, that's probably what we're going to get, is large fields of buds, right? That's what they do in like Colombia, Mexico, everywhere else, right? But in the United States, you know, we have money and we want buds to smoke. So here we are. Okay, so that said, I'm not trying to guilt you guys into growing outside. We've all talked about growing inside for over 4 hours here on these webinars. So we just want to think about the way that we're using our resources. So number one is going to be electricity. I used to, I should have brought it, but you know, I saw like a meme or whatever the other day where like you would see a house and everybody's got snow on the roof and one guy in the middle doesn't have snow on his roof. It used to be that was the cannabis grower, right? Like this guy's running hot lights, he's generating all this heat, he basically has a greenhouse in his attic. And think of how much electricity that is and how incredibly wasteful that is when you could be growing under other conditions, right? So nowadays, like the joke was that now it's gone from being the cannabis guy's on LEDs, now it's like the Bitcoin farmer or Ethereum or whatever, you know, cooking up some cryptocurrency. But anyway, so it's inefficient to grow inside. Okay, so first of all, we want to reduce our recurring costs. Like it would be cheaper for me to grow outside, but I grow inside. So I use efficient lights. So it's a little bit more to buy LEDs. It only costs like $50 to get your foot in the door with LEDs, but it's a little bit more expensive to buy LEDs rather than HPS, incandescent type of lights. But just, I advise LEDs because they generate less heat and they're a lot more efficient. So it's going to save you money in the long run and it's going to be less wasteful. Okay, so let's say you want to go a step beyond that. You say like, Gil, like you're starting to guilt me a little bit here. Your words are hurting me. Okay, so I'm in Massachusetts, and I believe throughout the United States, you guys can check out Green Energy Consumers. So it's a really simple way. Like, I don't own this property, so I'm not going to throw solar on the roof. But all I do is I subscribe to a service that gets in touch with my utility, and they bill me like an extra 10 or 15% extra to purchase chunks of wind electricity, such that all of my usage in my apartment is offset by the wind off at a wind farm. And that's a way for me to like offset all of my costs in my whole apartment. It's cost me like probably less than $150 a year, so it's not that much money. And it's a way for you to say like, okay, you know what? I'm gonna just take myself out of the equation. I'm not gonna like make things worse than they already are. You know, you can blame industry, but you also have to be accountable for your own actions here, you know? So we want to just kind of be accountable for what we're doing in our day-to-day lives. Okay, so I'm going to tell you guys, if you can, never pollute. So that part is pretty simple in kind of a gross sense. So like conventional fertilizer for, say, like a corn grow is going to be, it's going to give them a high yield, like if they're dumping on like nitrogen or whatever. And liquid nutrients, like we talked about, can be used in a sterile grow. So let's say you have an immune deficiency. Maybe it's best for you to go with hydro and use liquid nutrients. Also, liquid nutrients are going to give you more bang for your buck in a small space. So there are efficiencies here, and everything has a little bit of a trade-off. So I'm not going to say don't use liquid nutrients, because that may be that's the lane that you're in, where you have a small space, you know, you have a disease to contend with, and you don't want to say like, I want a really sterile grow and I want my buds to be sterile. And, you know, it's cool to do that too. But the fact is, at large scale on these, like a cornfield, the runoff of that fertilizer into the local stream is going to, it's okay, fertilize your corn. Now you're fertilizing the algae in the stream. And then you get an algal bloom that chokes fish. It like destroys the population, and it's saying like, hey, I want to just take everything I can and screw everything else outside of my farm. Okay, so we don't want to be like that. So all you need to do is just kind of like capture your runoff, be accountable for your waste, recycle your plastic stuff. Okay, so we touched on like our inputs, like our nutrients and stuff. So a lot of the inputs are mined or imported from far away. So like if you happen to live in Florida right now, you're contending with two things. Okay, you're contending with these phosphorus mines that are in the news that they've been mining phosphorus out of the ground. They've been keeping the water out of that mine, I believe. And then as the water is going to flush through there, take all that phosphorus dust and blow it into Tampa Bay. And, you know, it's going to be a mess. They already have seasonal algal blooms where you can't swim, you know. Okay, so another thing Florida has, to be a little bit, to draw a few through lines here, is they have a lot of coronavirus. Coronavirus may, okay, you may find new viruses if you encroach on bat populations. So another source for phosphorus, if you're not mining it, is going to be bat guano. So it's not a cool thing to encroach on bat populations, because they eat the insects that are trying to kill the mosquitoes that are trying to give us malaria. And, you know, they have their own space. So we don't want to be sending people in third world countries to be plucking the feces out of bat caves. Like, that's kind of crazy, right? So here's an alternative, seabird guano, right? So we can use seabird guano where it's like are seabirds essential? Yes, but like, okay, maybe they're not as cool as bats are. So, and they land on these islands and they poop on rocks, and we go scrape that up, and that's what you farm with. So that's like a little bit of a nicer input. So here's my list of everything that is feeding this plant right now. And you can kind of see a few different things here, and you can say, okay, some of these are good and some of these could be better. And what we're doing is we're always trending in that direction of going better. So Okay, maybe this next grow will avoid the mined phosphorus and we'll go to bat guano. And then this next grow we'll skip the bat guano and go to seabird guano. Okay, and then maybe there's another like soybean meal that we could be using that's even less destructive and even more local. Okay, so yeah, sorry, my screen's turning a little orange. That's a Windows setting I have on. So, okay, so I have things, for example, cocoa coir. So that's like my main substrate, right? Cocoa coir is a coconut husk. So it's a waste product. It's reusable, but in all likelihood, it was shipped from like Sri Lanka, right? Where they actually have coconuts and not Massachusetts, where we don't have coconuts. So you can see like there's always, nothing's perfect. There's no perfect input, but you just want to say like, oh, you know what? I heard that there's another input that will get me that potassium or whatever it is, and it'll just be a little bit better. And on your next grow, you just say, okay, I'll swap that in. And another thing is like, if you're feeding nasty stuff to your plant, like, do you want to smoke that? I don't, on a psychological level, just sort of, digest that. Okay, so another input I have is worm casting. So like worm castings, I know there's Best Buds worm castings in Massachusetts that you guys can check out. They're like a local worm farm where they're producing their own worm castings. So just try to get things locally if you think you can get it locally. So we're just always doing better. Okay, let's see. I think I covered everything I need to cover for that slide. I just want to double check. Yeah, so there's nothing wrong with like changing your grow as you go. You don't have to be a perfectionist. Just try to do a little bit better on each run. Okay, so this is going to be my last slide here, but another thing that I do just like for my own conscience is after I've chopped down my bud, I've got a root ball, I've got stalks. I throw that everything along with all my vegetable scraps in this little Bokashi composter. And believe it or not, that does handle all my compost for like a month. And then I just drop all the compost off at the farm down the street or next town over. And it's a pretty simple way just to say, I'm not creating waste, just like a simple way of being accountable for my waste. Okay, so it's like I grow in an apartment, so it's not to say that I'm some kind of like crunchy hippie who's doing everything, who's like, recycling my own feces or whatever, but it's just like, you got to try a little bit, right? So let's see. Okay, so we'll talk about, okay, so any soil that you've used that you want to get rid of, you can throw it in, say, your neighbor's garden bed or something, or your own garden bed, or any equipment that you're done with, try to donate it. There's a lot of veterans or organizations that try to set up vets with donated equipment. Look those up. That's a big area of waste too. It's like these big mechanical objects that we use to grow, right? Okay, so let's see. So even soil is shipped across the country a lot of times, right? It's formulated in Colorado and I buy it in Massachusetts. And it's, it takes a semi to get it over here on a pallet. So nothing is without like energy costs. Like we're on this earth, we're going to use energy, right? Like we have to live. But your soil, for an example, can be reused. So your soil actually can get better with time. So if you're running a soil grow, you can recycle your soil, re-amend it with some of these items like I listed on the last slide, and your soil is actually going to get better with age, because what's happening is your plant is recruiting soil microbes, and then the first run, it's got a good amount of microbes. Okay, you harvest that plant, you plant another plant, and then it's going to recruit more soil microbes. So over time, you're going to get a healthier and healthier soil, given that you're amending it lightly with some nutrition. So it's a cool way to go, and it's something that I've taken a lot of interest in, and I think you guys might enjoy. Okay, so that kind of a living soil that has a lot of biology is actually going to actively sequester carbon. So that's one of the sources, one of the better ways that we can easily sequester carbon is just through soil. So I know you guys don't have fields of farms, but we want to be thinking about things, moving things in this direction, because you vote with your dollars. So everything that you buy is going to be sort of influencing the cannabis growing industry. So if we all go buy General Hydroponics products, which is like, okay, bought by Monsanto, maybe not the way that we want things to go, maybe don't buy those products, but maybe try Nectar for the Gods or like Advanced Nutrients or whatever it is that you feel is a little bit more meeting your goals. Okay. Okay. So I also want to make a quick point about soil and health. So like we talked about, a healthy soil has a lot of these symbiotic microbes that work with a plant, right? So we're in an ecosystem here, whether you like it or not, even if you're just in a little pot. So the soil and the plant, they give back to each other, right? The roots release sugars, the microbes take those up, they recruit minerals, bring it to the plant. So let's see. That's what a healthy soil is going to be. So a healthy soil also has like a wide array of these different nutrients, right? We saw what the cannabis plant needs, what elements it needs. So it's going to have a lot of nutrients. It's going to have a lot of microbes, bacteria, maybe arthropods, maybe worms. So on the other hand, you have unhealthy soils. So there are soils out in, say, the Midwest, that have become so depleted and so force-fed that they can't sustain biology. And what happens is the soil gets broken down and you don't have microbes and fungi holding on to water anymore. And you may as well be growing in sand. So essentially, like what growers did during the Dust Bowl is like they're growing like hydro, where they're just kind of stuffing the plant with nutrients, and then they're basically growing in dust. So that can work, but it's not sustainable at scale, right? So if you keep going in that direction, you end up with the Sahara Desert, quite literally. Okay. So like in a lot of the Midwest, even now, they're dumping phosphorus fertilizer onto the fields, but the plants can't access the phosphorus because the soil lacks the specific bacteria that break down the phosphorus and chelate it and make it plant available. So basically their soils there aren't healthy, so they have to try to keep force feeding the plants, but it's not working out. So plants need basics like phosphorus, and then they also need trace elements like, say, molybdenum. Like I don't feed my plant molybdenum, but it's in maybe like the worm castings or the kelp meal that I feed. Okay, so humans are similar too, right? So for example, like we need zinc in our bodies, and if we do not get zinc in our crops from our crops, and the crops don't have zinc in their soil, so I need zinc, your plant has zinc, the soil needs to have zinc, right? So that makes sense, right? Through line there. So if your diet is made up of zinc deficient crops that were grown in zinc deficient soil, you're going to be fine until you have a zinc deficiency, and then you literally cannot grow very tall. So you can see that we want to promote healthy soils here. I'm not going to say like you need to grow in a particular style, but you want to try to influence things and just think about the larger picture here. So I'm a little bit more interested in involving myself with creating soil rather than using conventional fertilizers. A lot of folks say that, okay, like fertilizers yield and you get dank medicinal kind of plants in more of like a pharmaceutical style or like medical style grow. But then maybe like the terpenes, like if you're after that really rich flavor, you may achieve that in a soil grow, and that takes more space. So it's a little bit give and take with things. Okay. Yeah, so that was it for webinar 4 of 4. These are the information sources you want to be checking out. Again, there is me on Instagram, Seed Clinic on Instagram, Rhizorich on Instagram. You can always be hitting up Royal Clean Seeds online. They have great informational every step that you'll need. They have on there. Also check out Build a Soil. They have a lot of those great inputs, and they're really well researched and sort of responsibly sourced. And then on YouTube, you've got where you may be seeing this on Seed Clinic, Future Cannabis Projects, a couple other fun, some podcasts you can check out. And then if you guys want to see these slides, there is a tiny URL link where you can look these up. And then always feel free to reach out to me on Instagram, on email. And I think I don't think we got any questions, right? So I think we're all ready to
No,
wrap up.
someone made an astute comment, which is, the veterans community is really outgoing and they're happy to pick stuff up. So they'll take the burden of dropping it off somewhere. And for donations, in terms of sustainability, which I'm really glad you brought up, I think it's important for us all to keep that in mind. Veterans are outgoing to be helpful, and yeah, I think I completely support your statements about the sustainability. I think we can't have a future that has mimicked the past, or we're just not going to make it. So I hope other people hear your message. Awesome, Gil. This has really been an incredible treat. For all the time that you've donated, and the energy and the wisdom that you've imparted. I think it's really an incredible honor and opportunity. And I'm sure I already get feedback from patients that everybody loves your style and your tidbits. I can't wait to see the next stage of your career, and I'm sure everybody will follow you. At least on that next YouTube sort of journey, but undoubtedly, watching your social media and sort of seeing you flourish.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
I choked on a little water, so my voice is hoarse, but thank you so much for the opportunity, for taking, all these 4-hour plus sessions, for hopping on late at night, for hosting everything, for all the logistics with Lily, and for just promoting grow to patients. I think that's like the most important thing you can be doing if you're a patient.
Yeah, no, I
try
agree.
to learn to grow for yourself.
Awesome. Well, it's been real. Thanks everybody for joining us. And please send love to Gil in any way that you can. The very least of which would be to follow his social media, but feel free to reach out. He's abundantly friendly and eager to help, as we all are. Awesome. So thanks a lot, Gil. Appreciate it.
Right on. Thank you. Take care.